Hey, good afternoon, guys. This is Steve here from LOJ Conversions again. Today I've got John from PSI Conversion with me. We're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to do a couple segments here about the differences between the different LS motors, specifically Gen 3, Gen 4 motors, both from like a physical standpoint and then a electrical wiring standpoint. So first we're going to talk about the Gen 3 motors. And John and I both stipulated before this discussion that we're going to ignore the LS2 right now, and we'll explain why later, because it's kind of a bastard child between Gen 3 and Gen 4. But Gen 3 motors, they started out in '97 with the LS1 in the C5 Corvette, and then they were also available in the Trans Am, Camaro.
In 1998 they went to the F-bodies,
Okay.
so the Trans Am and the Camaro. And then in 1999 they started coming into the trucks, and that lasted all the way through mid-2007 in the trucks.
In the cars, it lasted until about 2005.
Right around 2005 is when you started going into the what we call the E40 LS2,
Okay.
and then you started getting into the 58X, and that was in the Corvette only.
Okay.
The CTSV was still a 5.7 liter
Right.
LS6.
Yep. So like a Gen 3 motor, one of the biggest confusions we get is, especially for me as a swap kit manufacturer, I'll advertise a kit as an LS1 swap kit, and then I'll get phone calls, well, will this work with an LS2? And then I'll advertise it as a Gen 3, Gen 4 small block swap kit, and they'll be like, well, does it work with an LS1? Because there's so many different motors that fall into the quote LS family. That's kind of why I want to talk about a Gen 3 motor, and so you can understand all the motors that fall into Gen 3, Gen 4 motors. So Gen 3 motors, to me, the defining characteristics are cathedral port heads, and again, we're ignoring the LS2 right now, but cathedral port heads, 24X reluctor wheel on the crankshaft with the crank sensor mounted on the side of the block behind the starter, 1X sensor on the camshaft mounted in the back of the block in the valley, knock sensors mounted in the valley, and then the rest of the physical characteristics as far as mounting locations, oil pan bolt pattern, trans bolt pattern, motor mount bolt pattern, accessory drives, that's the same between the motors. They're interchangeable.
That is correct.
So, so like John said, it's not just car motors, it's truck motors.
Yeah, so what a lot of people get confused on is they will call, they call basically everything an LS1.
Right.
In reality, the LS1 is the 5.7 liter that was available in the Camaro, the Corvette, CTSV.
Yeah.
Then they have a 5.3, 6.0 liters. Those are Vortec truck engines.
Yeah.
But for all intents and purposes, they're all the same when it comes to the physical characteristics or just the wire from a wiring standpoint. All of those engines are going to be wired pretty much the same way. Where you start getting into variants in the Gen 3 is going to be once you start getting into your strictly drive-by wire setups.
Right, which we'll talk about that later when we talk about the EFI management of Gen 3 motors. But suffice it to say that if you have a Gen 3 motor from any year, you can have them drive-by wire or drive-by cable, depending on the EFI setup you have on it. But there's nothing physically restricting on the motor stopping you from going one way or the other.
That is correct.
So you can take a truck motor that came drive-by wire in 2005, throw a drive-by cable throttle body in it, and as long as you have the right harness and PCM to match that,
That is correct.
it'll work.
Yep.
So that kind of covers the Gen 3 motors. Again, that's a high-level overview, but it's important to understand that the 4.8 liter, 5.3 liter, 6 liter truck motors, these 5.7 liter car motors, all the Gen 3, they're really all the same family, and they're interchangeable. There's a lot of commonality between them, and you shouldn't get hung up on calling one an LS1 or not. It's a Gen 3 small block Chevy. And again, as I said in the beginning, there's a little bit of a caveat with the LS2. We'll cover that in its own video, but the next video coming out, we'll talk about Gen 4 motors, and then the next video after that, we'll talk about LS2 motors, and then you'll see more videos coming out later about the EFI management of those motors. So, thanks.